With members of the Arab League so eager for U.S. participation, have they offered to offset any of the costs associated with this action? So, gentlemen, what about boots on the ground? The Arab League, are they going to pony up our objectives?
With respect to Arab countries offering to bear cost and to assist, the answer is profoundly yes, they have. That offer is on the table. With respect to boots on the ground, profoundly no. There will be no boots on the ground. The President has said that again and again, and there is nothing in this authorization that should contemplate it, and we reiterate, no boots on the ground.
The offer and the proposal on the table, what are the figures that we're talking about?
Well, we don't know what action we're engaged in right now, but they've been quite significant. I mean, very significant. In fact, some of them have said that if the United States is prepared to go do the whole thing the way we've done it previously in other places, they'll carry that cost. That's how dedicated they are to this. Obviously, that's not in the cards, and nobody's talking about it. But they're talking in serious ways about getting this job done.
It's hard to know exactly what's happening in Syria right now. I'd like to know specifically how that release of chemical gas, if it did occur, and it looks like it did, how that occurred. Because frankly, I don't think Assad would have done that. It does not serve his interests. It would tend to draw us into that civil war even further.
Who do you think is behind it? Who do you think is behind it?
You know, you've got a war going on over there. Supposedly that airstrike was on an ammo dump. And so I don't know if it was released because there was gas stored in the ammo dump or not. That's plausible. I'm not saying that's what I think happened, but
You're more inclined to believe the position of what Bashar al-Assad is saying and what the Russians are saying right now than more inclined to believe what even your colleagues here in the United States believe is truth, that this is Assad, and what human rights observers over there say is Assad?
I don't think it would have served Assad's purposes to do a chemical attack on his people. So it's hard for me to understand why he would do that if he did.
Congressman Tom Massey, thanks for your time.
In any case, no evidence has been found so far that there was any chemical attack. That's the bottom line from this story. That's not to say that there wasn't one. I don't have definitive proof either way, but going there and looking for any evidence, the dozens of people living there I interviewed, the soldiers working there, the military police, the government officials, the residents, the doctors in the hospitals, no one saw a single shred of evidence of any chemical attack. And I think that's the main point to take away from this. We're going to keep investigating it and keep looking into it, but for right now, that's where the investigation stands.
I am an ordinary British citizen who happens to do research on what is going on in the current neocon wars, which are being fought in Syria at this very moment. I check out what is happening by credible journalists. Now, there aren't any of those on Sky News, and there aren't any others in the whole of the Western media.
These conspiracy theories are a form of pollution. Just like fake news, these kinds of ideas, they poison the media environment, and they make all of us sick.
Leaders on both sides of the aisle in Congress, in the media, in our intelligence services, in virtually every overfunded think tank in Washington, have suddenly aligned tonight on a single point of agreement. America must go to war in Syria immediately. Bashar al-Assad cannot continue to lead that country. He must be overthrown. Assad is an evil man, they tell us. His latest crime is a chlorine gas attack carried out over the weekend by his forces against a rebel-held suburb of Damascus. Assad's poison gas suffocated children. Pictures of the aftermath of that are all over the internet, and they are horrifying. Assad is a monster. That's the official story. Almost everyone in power claims to believe it. But do they really know that? Of course they don't really know that. They're making it up. They have no real idea what happened.
Mr. Ron Paul. Ron, nice to have you with us tonight. I appreciate your time on this. You heard that report. The administration is confident. I think a lot of people are asking tonight, what does that mean?
Well, I don't know what they're confident about. They're confident in telling their lies and hope people will believe it. But I just think this whole idea that all of a sudden that Assad's gassing his own people, I think is total nonsense. Total nonsense.
The debate that seems to be missing from this is, and this was actually mentioned by the ambassador, was what possible motive might have triggered Syria to launch a chemical attack at this time in this place. You know, the Syrians are winning. Don't take my word for it. Take the American military's word for it. General Virgil, the head of CENTCOM, he said to Congress the other day, Assad has won this war, and we need to face that. So, and then you got last week the statement by Trump, or the tweet by Trump, that America had finished with ISIL and we were going to pull out soon, very soon. And then suddenly you get...
Okay, I'm very sorry. You've been very patient.
That Assad is either the dumbest dictator on the planet Earth or he didn't do it. Because you think about it, they've been winning the war for over a year. The only thing that galvanizes world opposition to the Assad regime, the only thing that gets us involved at all is the use of chemical weapons. And when you compare them to other weapons, there are many other weapons much more lethal. 10 guys with machine guns are much more lethal than this attack was. Now, I'm not saying it's not horrific, but what I am saying is it doesn't make any sense for Assad to have done this, because it did galvanize the world against him.
You said something in there, though. You said if he did it at all. Do you doubt that?
Well, like I say, he's either the dumbest dictator on the planet or he didn't do it. So one of the two. I don't have evidence either way. I've not been given any briefing that indicates who did it or what the proof is.
The only people that are reporting with a voice of reason or sanity or honesty are Peter Hitchens, who's questioned why the hell would Assad use chemical weapons when he's winning, and Tucker Carlson in the US, who said the same thing.
How would it benefit Assad using chlorine gas last weekend? Well, it wouldn't. Assad's forces had been winning the war in Syria. The administration just announced its plans to pull American troops out of Syria, having vanquished ISIS. That's good news for Assad, and about the only thing he could do to reverse it and to hurt himself would be to use poison gas against children. Well, he did it anyway, they tell us. He's that evil. Please. Keep in mind, this is the same story they told us last April. Do you remember that? It was almost exactly a year ago. The new administration announced it was no longer seeking to depose Assad from power. Regime change was no longer our policy. So the usual war chorus in Washington started yelping, went berserk, and days later, Assad supposedly used sarin gas against civilians in Syria. There was video. We bombed a Syrian airbase in response to that. At the time, this show asked what seemed like the obvious question: are we really sure that Assad did that? It seems weirdly timed and counterproductive to him. Shut up, they explained. Of course we're sure. What an unpatriotic question. But of course they were lying. 2 months ago, the Secretary of Defense admitted that actually we still have no proof that Assad used sarin gas last year. The story, it turns out, was propaganda. It was designed to manipulate Americans, just like so much of what they say. We've seen this movie before, and we know how it ends.
But I think Trump might be playing us with a fiddle. You know, one day he's a good guy. I think it's good to get out of the war. We'll throw that to the libertarians. That's what Ron Paul's been saying all along. But then the next day there's a change, and it's 100% opposite. Yeah. Nothing can change that big. And it's amazing the American people buy into that and just not pull their hair out and say, hey, enough is enough. Why don't you tell us the truth?
I don't think people might really conceptualize, maybe even not this president, how out of control this could escalate.
It's true, but I think we have to step back and not put this in partisan terms. This is a U.S. mistake that started 7 years ago. And I remember the day on your show when President Obama said, Assad must go. And I looked at you and Joe and I said, huh? How's he going to do that? Where's the policy for that?
Right.
And we know they sent in the CIA to overthrow Assad. The CIA and Saudi Arabia together in covert operations tried to overthrow Assad. It was a disaster. Eventually it brought in both ISIS as a splinter group to the jihadists that went in. It also brought in Russia. So we have been digging deeper and deeper and deeper. What we should do now is get out and not continue to throw missiles, not have a confrontation with Russia, 7 years has been a disaster under Obama, continuing under Trump. This is what I would call the permanent state. This is the CIA. This is Pentagon. We started a war to overthrow a regime. It was covert. It was Timber Sycamore. People can look it up, the CIA operation, together with Saudi Arabia. Still it's shrouded in secrecy, which is part of the problem in our country.
These conspiracy theories are a form of pollution. Just like fake news, these kinds of ideas, they poison the media environment, and they make all of us sick.
A major war effort, shrouded in secrecy, never debated by Congress, never explained to the American people, signed by President Obama, never explained. And this created chaos. And so just throwing more missiles in right now is not a response. Because we, to this day, back rebels that are trying to overthrow a government contrary to international law, contrary to the UN Charter, contrary to common sense, contrary to practical path. We can't do it. And it's just creating ongoing crisis to the extent of facing an imminent confrontation with Russia. And so we have made a proxy war in Syria. It's killed 500,000 people, displaced 10 million. And I'll say predictably so, because I predicted it 7 years ago that there was no way to do this and that it would make a complete chaos. So what I would plead to President Trump is get out. Like his instinct told him, by the way. That was his instinct. But then all the establishment, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Pentagon, everybody said, no, that's irresponsible. But his instinct is right. Get out.
Back in 2013, when the Syrian civil war was still in its early days, one onlooker weighed in on Twitter. Here's part of what he wrote, quote, "We should stay the hell out of Syria. The rebels are just as bad as the current regime. What will we get for our lives and billions of dollars? Zero." In another tweet, he said this, quote, "Let the Arab League take care of Syria. Why are these rich Arab countries not paying us for the tremendous cost of such an attack?" And in yet another tweet, he said this, "What will we get for bombing Syria beside more debt and a possible long-term conflict?" Of course, you know who wrote that. It was Donald Trump, and he was right. And that's one of the reasons he got elected president. And now the same people who brought you a dying American middle class, undefended American borders, and endless pointless wars in countries you could not find on a map are telling the president he's got to depose Assad for reasons that are both unclear and demonstrably dishonest. And by the way, it may happen.
Well, I've just been woke out of bed by rockets flying over and explosions. This is Damascus at 4 o'clock in the morning. I believe the United States of America has just attacked Syria. Thank you, America. Thank you very, very much. Donald Trump, sir, you're an idiot. You're an absolute idiot.
Tonight, I want to speak with you about why we have taken this action. 1 year ago, Assad launched a savage chemical weapons attack against his own innocent people. Last Saturday, the Assad regime again deployed chemical weapons to slaughter innocent civilians, this time in the town of Douma, near the Syrian capital of Damascus. This massacre was a significant escalation in a pattern of chemical weapons use by that very terrible regime.
This is, actually scandalous that the U.S. has launched a strike based on insurgent-tied social media sources. Well, this is exactly what Defense Secretary Jim Mattis said at a briefing several days ago, where he didn't have solid intelligence on any chemical attack in Douma. What he did have were social media reports, people saying stuff on the internet. And who were those people? The same people that State Department spokesperson Heather Nauert's referring to. They're the Syrian White Helmets, which has been funded to the tune of at least $23 million by the State Department.
Let's talk about the White Helmets. The White Helmets were founded in 2013 by a British ex-military officer. They have been funded to the tune of $100 million by the US, UK, and Europe and other states. They purport to be rescuing civilians in eastern Aleppo and Idlib, yet no one in eastern Aleppo has heard of them. And I say no one, bearing in mind that now 95% of these areas of eastern Aleppo are liberated. The white helmets purport to be neutral, yet they can be found carrying guns and standing on the dead bodies of Syrian soldiers. And their video footage actually contains children that have been recycled in different reports. So you can find a girl named Aya who turns up in a report in month, say, August, and she turns up in the next month in 2 different locations. So they are not credible.
And it's amazing the American people buy into that and just not pull their hair out and say, hey, enough is enough. Why don't you tell us the truth?
By now you've heard that Trump ordered missiles fired into Syria, a sovereign nation, an act of war, without the authorization of Congress. Something he himself criticized Obama for doing just a few short years ago. And while neocons, Zionists, and the military-industrial complex are all celebrating today, most Americans probably can't even find Syria on a map. So here it is. This is where we fired missiles into a sovereign nation, not because it was crucial to national security, not because it was a preemptive strike to destroy weapons of mass destruction, not because it was to contain the ever-growing communism. No, for a much simpler reason. A reason that can be easily seen if you keep looking at that map. And if you pay attention to the headlines that preceded this act of war, the unavoidable truth is, we fired missiles into a sovereign nation because Israel and the House of Saud wanted us to. And at the end of the day, what is America if not the militarized whore that listens to our pimps? The excuse they used was an obvious lie and an insult to your intelligence.
I mean, the government's lies are very transparent and very easy to see. And anybody who applies a smattering of critical thinking will immediately call out numerous lies, and the government position just completely collapses. Well, you had Major General Jonathan Swan on recently on Sky News, and he started off the conversation with what possible motive would Assad have to carry out a chemical weapons attack when it was guaranteed that that would bring the wrath of the whole world down on him and give the UK and US governments the pretext to bomb. He wouldn't do it. He is not the stupidest man in the world. He's survived 7 years of brutal war against terrorists.
Well, if not who, then?
The jihadi terrorists, the Wahhabi Salafis, Jaish al-Islam, who controlled that area, staged the attack.
So here's a guy, here's Lord West, former First Sea Lord and Chief of Naval Staff and UK Chief of Defense Intelligence. Here is a guy, former UK Chief of Defense Intelligence. You want to hear what he says about the gas attack?
Until I could set up a situation where I would wait until a Syrian helicopter was overhead dropping a barrel bomb and then set off some chlorine agent. I know I could do that. And that's what I would do if I was one of the Islamic terrorists, because they know they're losing.
But you don't have any evidence for that, do you?
We know that they've used chlorine in the past. We know they've done that in the past. And what is our evidence? A lot of the evidence we've been shown are, for example, information from the White Helmets, who do some good work rescuing people, but they didn't do anything to try and get women and children out of areas where they were being used as human shields in the past, in Aleppo and places. And they're hardly neutral observers. And similarly, the World Health Organization was using doctors who are working in terrible circumstances in that region. Again, hardly neutral observers. So the things I've seen it just rings alarm bells. I hope that they have got this very clear evidence, and if they have, our response, I think, was absolutely right. But I am concerned, and I think as we move forward, I wouldn't be in the least surprised if there were another gas attack and someone would say, because it's in their interest to make us respond and get more and more involved.
I know there's a lot of concern from people that the residents being interviewed are plants. They're Russian operatives, or they're staged interviews or things like that. And so we just randomly went up to different people. No one came up to us, and interviewed probably about 30 or 40 people throughout the town. And consistently, not one person in the entire town that we talked to said that they had seen or heard anything about a chemical attack. They said that they'd lived there for 15 years, 7 to 15 years, some of them, and so they're longtime residents of the area, and many of them were very close to the site that was allegedly attacked on the day that it was allegedly attacked. One man said that he was within 50 meters at the time they say it was attacked, and he heard and saw nothing out of the ordinary. When I asked them what they thought the chemical attack was, they told me, all of them told me that it was staged by the rebels who were occupying the town at that time. They said that it was a fabrication, that it was a hoax, and when I asked them why, they told me that it was because the rebels were desperate and they needed a ploy to help get the Syrian army off their back so that they can escape.
Award-winning British journalist Robert Fisk also recently reported from on the ground in Douma in an article published in UK's The Independent.
7 times Press Awards Foreign Reporter of the Year, Robert Fisk.
His interviews with Syrian residents in Douma only further solidifies the Russian claims of a staged chemical attack hoax. Fisk is also very strongly anti-Assad, so this reporting is not coming from a so-called biased right-wing pro-Assad conspiracy journalist or a Russian propagandist. It's coming from a British journalist who entered Douma fully believing the official Western narrative. And as Eva Bartlett accurately pointed out last year in regards to U.S. corporate media sources on the ground in Syria.
So, your sources on the ground, you don't have them.
This is what Robert Fisk wrote, which a doctor at the only hospital in Douma told him regarding the alleged attack. I was with my family in the basement of my home, 300 meters from here, on the night, but all the doctors know what happened. There was a lot of shelling by government forces, and aircraft were always over Douma at night. But on this night, there was wind and huge dust clouds began to come into the basement and cellars where people lived. People began to arrive here suffering from hypoxia, oxygen loss. Then someone at the door, a white helmet, shouted, "Gas!" and a panic began. People started throwing water over each other. Yes, the video was filmed here. It is genuine, but what you see are people suffering from hypoxia, not gas poisoning.
Meanwhile, more doubts have been raised over this footage filmed by the White Helmets group in a local hospital. The video claims to show the aftermath of the chemical attack. But our sister channel, RT Arabic, visited that very hospital in Douma and talked with the doctors and the locals. They described what happened on the 7th of April, claiming they saw no toxic agents being used.
People from the White Helmets told us about the use of chemical weapons, but we saw no sign of that. If chemical weapons were used against those people, our medical staff would have also been affected.
People poured water over our heads, repeating that we had been attacked with chemical weapons. Somebody ran up from outside shouting about a chemical attack. We don't know who that was.
We heard an explosion, and somebody said it was a chemical weapon. We ran to where the noise came from and started pouring water over the people, but they seemed to be okay and then walked away without any help.
People got so confused. Somebody started pouring water over people's heads, saying there had been a chemical attack. I was at the spot with my wife and daughter, but none of us experienced any symptoms of chemical poisoning.
اجوا مرة غير معيتوا برا يعني نروح على النقطة دغري رحنا على النقطة ما لقيت غير زلمتنا ولني كنت عليه معي.
Some people, some weak people, we don't know any one of them come to here and they said chemical attack. Here in the hospital, we didn't see any chemical attack symptoms here.
These conspiracy theories are a form of pollution. Just like fake news, these kinds of ideas, they poison the media environment. and they make all of us sick.
And there's definitely something that stings.
These backpacks belong to Malaz and Masa, 7-year-old twins from Douma.
The smell is still quite strong. These are the things that they weren't able to watch yet. And look, that's the toy that her daughter hid away to try to keep her safe. And she would tell the toy, you know, you might suffocate, but at least you'll be safe from the bombing.
They heard about chemical attacks by TV only.
أنا بعيد عنه ولا أنا أبو بشار بعيد عنه 50 متر.
This gentleman, he was 50 meters from that attack.
No. Wait, what do you mean he was 50 meters?
50, he said.
Right.
From that show, he said.
Okay.
Okay.
On that day?
On that day.
Okay. So when they see it on TV, when they hear about it on TV, what do they think? And what do they think about that?
هلا وقت شفتوه بالتلفزيون شو رايك؟ They were laughing.
They were laughing.
Yeah. ليش عم تضحكوا؟ يعني لعبة بايخة.
Who started the idea that there was a chemical attack? Who does he think started
يعني مين بتعتقدوا انه هدول اللي لعبوا هاللعبة انه المسرحية سوا تبع
يعني المسرحية صرنا كلياتنا صرنا نعرفها. يعني ما الغرب كله عم يلعب علينا وانت بتعرف وغيرك بتعرف.
Okay, he said the West keeps playing this game, so not first time. And بس انت بتعتقد مين؟
اخي هي لعبة الغرب هن عم يلعبوا فينا. نحن ما.
This the West plays this game.
Why?
ليش بتعتقد الغرب لعب هاللعبة؟
لأنه ما حدا بس بالإذاعة والتلفزيون غيرهم. هن اللي يعني مثل اللي قالوا الثاني بدي يعمل لك
هي كل الشغله.
He said like the fund excuse to attack Syria or to bombard Syria.
So as one runs out of steam, they create another fake news program and they pound away on it. But it's a shame that the American people buy into this. But I'm hoping that I sense that at least we run into people that are saying, you know, enough is enough. And, you know, I've seen that.
Congressman, what is the mission behind this cell job that's being put on the world, not just the American people, but the world, to vilify both Syria and Russia without hard evidence? Why the cell job?
Which makes us wonder, like, why is this not a pretext? Why is this not fake? That's the question I ask, because it seems clearly fake. Shut up, Putin defender.
Do you ever worry that inadvertently you might be part of a Kremlin propaganda machine? Inadvertently?
No.
Well, I think they have an ulterior goal, and it's been around for a long time, and it has a lot to do with Saudi Arabia and Iran. I think that's the number one. I think works into that are the Shia against the Sunnis, and that works into it. And then there's the neocons in this country who have their agenda and perpetual war for perpetual profits in the military-industrial complex, and they all come together. Then you throw in oil, and they all come together, and guess what? It's bipartisan.
The push to war in Syria, by the way, has united politicians from both sides. Trump has to take action in Syria. Everyone nods sagely. That ought to make you nervous.
The question is, what does it mean by being pro-Britain or pro-American? Does it mean being pro the interests of 60 million British people? Or does it mean the clique in the UK government, the cabinet, that are doing things for their own personal benefit and their cronies? In the arms companies, BAE Systems. Theresa May's husband runs a large hedge fund or private equity fund, which is the largest shareholder of BAE Systems. Do you think BAE Systems went up because Theresa May started bombing Syria? Yes, they did. She's got a conflict of interest. That's one. So I am speaking for the vast majority of British people. 59.9 million out of 60 million English people or Scots. I'm not speaking for the UK government, who do not work for the British people. And they plainly ignore the wishes of the British people, because hardly anyone in Britain wants Theresa May to bomb Syria. It's less than 25% want Theresa May to start a war.
All right. Ian, I'm afraid we have run out of time. Thank you very much indeed for coming on and putting your side of that across. Ian, there talking to us via Skype. Thank you.
The unavoidable truth is We fired missiles into a sovereign nation because Israel and the House of Saud wanted us to. And at the end of the day, what is America if not the militarized whore that listens to our pimps?
In fact, some of them have said that if the United States is prepared to go do the whole thing the way we've done it previously in other places, they'll carry that cost. That's how dedicated they are to this.
الأمر يستدعي أن نشارك حلفائنا في عملية ضد النظام في سوريا لن نتأخر عن ذلك.
Real reason is clear to anyone paying attention. So clear, it's even mentioned on their outlets.
What is the American national security interest that would be served by regime change in Syria?
Well, if you care about Israel, you have to be interested at least in what's going on in Syria.
But I just want to get back to the core question that I think a lot of voters have, which is what's the American national security interest that is served? You said if you care about Israel, I do care about Israel, but what's the American national security interest that would be served by regime change? You can think of a lot of potential downsides, deaths, cost, etc.
But you won't do anything. You might even make excuses. Hell, some people are even cheering this. If you can't see who pulls the strings by now, you never will. You will line up for the slaughter, like all the rest have over the years, as the ruling class has sold the blood of our young men to the highest bidder, while you stuff your face with their poison and laugh at the shiny baubles they wave in front of you.
How many people, Mike, does a guy have to kill by chlorine gas until the world gets upset? The only thing that can happen is for President Trump to lead a coalition of the willing, the Arabs and Europeans, to go in and destroy every air base that Assad owns. If I were president, there would be no runway available to the Syrian Air Force, there'd be no planes available, and I'd make Assad a target because he's a war criminal. This is a defining moment for the president. Take this guy on, blow his Air Force to smithereens, and go after him. The next thing you know, the world will be a better place.
الأمر يستدعي أن نشارك حلفائنا في عملية ضد النظام في سوريا لن نتأخر عن ذلك.
The United States of America will not allow the Assad regime to continue to use chemical weapons. I spoke to the president this morning, and he said if the Syrian regime uses this poisonous gas again, the United States is locked and loaded. When our president draws a red line, our president enforces the red line. We are prepared to sustain this pressure if the Syrian regime is foolish enough to test our will. Thank you.
But I am concerned, and I think as we move forward, you know, I wouldn't be in the least surprised if there were another gas attack and someone would say, because it's in their interest to make us respond and get more and more involved.
But I think the most important reason why we did what we did last weekend is that chemical weapons were used. And there is a consensus, there's international law among civilized people and nations that chemical weapons should not be used in warfare.
Right, I agree.
And they were used like they were used last year. And President Trump drew that line in the sand that you'll remember Barack Obama drew but didn't actually enforce. President Trump actually enforced it. And it was a surgical strike. We just struck at 3 facilities that were used in the production and the dissemination of chemical weapons, and we hit those. And if Assad tries to use them again, hopefully I think we should hit them again.
You know, I wouldn't be in the least surprised if there were another gas attack and someone would say, because it's in their interest to make us respond and get more and more involved.
We are prepared to sustain this pressure if the Syrian regime is foolish enough to test our will. Thank you.
الأمر يستدعي أن نشارك حلفائنا في عملية ضد النظام في سوريا لن نتأخر عن ذلك.
And it's amazing the American people buy into that and just not pull their hair out and say, hey, enough is enough. Why don't you tell us the truth?
Because we, to this day, back rebels that are trying to overthrow a government contrary to international law, contrary to the UN Charter, contrary to common sense, contrary to practical path. We can't do it. And it's just creating ongoing crisis to the extent of facing an imminent confrontation with Russia.
But it's a shame that the American people buy into this, but I'm hoping that I sense that at least we run into people that are saying, you know, enough is enough. And, you know, I've seen that.
The truth is rising. The truth will prevail.